Well, welcome to another edition of Intentional Conversations. This is Mike.sandlin of Cape Fear Men, and I thank you for joining us tonight. On this program, we talk with men who have a vested interest in helping men to be the men God has called us to be. And today I have DaleBrown with me. Dale is the founder of Men's Divorce Recovery, a ministry that empowers divorced men through support, encouragement, knowledge to survive and thrive beyond their divorce to become a resilient, strong, and wise asset to their world. Dale is located in Austin, Texas. He's half the continent away from where I'm at, but it's great that we can use this technology to have a face-to-face conversation. Dale, I just really thank you for joining us today.
I am absolutely thrilled to be here, Mike, again. I miss you guys in Cape Fear, but hopefully we'll be back sometime.
Yeah, we'll get you back here sometime at some point. So, we always got something going on that you could really be involved in. Probably next year we'll get you back out here for an Iron Sharpens Iron conference next spring. Thoroughly enjoy working with you and having you around when we do those things. Well, Dale, let's talk about divorce recovery a little bit. What is that ministry all about? What is Men's Divorce Recovery? And how did God move you into that? If you can maybe give us the Reader Digest version of that.
Well, I can tell you that if 10 years ago you would have told me that I would be where I am today, I would have said there is no possible way that my pathway would have gone the way it was. I anticipated being a pastor and living the pastor's life, probably retiring as a pastor, maybe moving overseas at the last years of life. But those plans were definitely thwarted. Life took some pretty amazing turns, and part of that was having to do it with church, and then part of this having to do with an unchosen divorce. So related to divorce recovery, my family were living in Austin after moving back from pastoring a church in New England, and I went on a teaching trip to Africa, came back, and after 32 years of marriage, my wife had left me, had moved out of the church parsonage. Nobody in the church even knew she was gone. She snuck out in the middle of the night. So, there's a whole lot more of that story, obviously, than that. But on top of all the things that happened to me, this was kind of the last straw, the last, crushing blow. And I was really devastated. And, I guess I probably had those normal sorts of grief experiences. Both my parents had died. I have a sister who was my oldest sister, taken her life at the age of 50. That was 25 years ago. And, just the normal ups and downs. Of course, being a pastor is traumatic in and of itself, but also an amazing privilege. But this divorce really was unexpected. It was unbiblical on her part. She had gone to a pastor, our pastor, and tried to talk him into it. And he was like, "Excuse me, there's no cause for you to do this at all." So, but out of that experience, then I realized that there just was not a good, solid ministries to men going through divorce. So what I did is I go on Amazon, I read. I went on Amazon, I found some books about how you can get a woman into bed. That was a good divorce recovery book there. And I was like, no, that's not me. And then either how to get all the money you can out of your soon-to-be ex-wife, or keep her from getting all the money she can out of you. And that was not of interest to me. There are some good resources for dads, being a divorced dad. That was on there. But one book I did find was Kristen Armstrong's book. She was married to Lance Armstrong of Austin fame. And she was married to him way back in the early 2000s and had 2 kids by him, I believe. And then he divorced her. I think he chased after Sheryl Crow at the time. But she's a great Christian and wrote a book for women, a divorce book for women, a devotional. And so I read it and I thought that's great. But having worked with men for 30 years of ministry, having been in Promise Keepers, having, worked some with Richard Rohr and that whole spiritual journeys of men, then, I know that the journey of a man is very different than a woman. I mean, there are similarities, but the journey is distinct. And nothing was covering that particular aspect of a man's journey when they go through divorce. So God led me to write the book. God led me to write the book that I wish I'd had, and I hope you never need. So the fewer of these books that I sell, the better. but to get the book into the hands of divorced men is really critical. And God really led me. This was back in 2016, to start men's divorce recovery with a mission that you just stated, because I think that 80% of divorces are filed by women. So whatever else you want to say about that, then that means that most divorces are instigated by the woman, and I totally understand that often it's a very needed thing. If you're an abusive husband, we'd always counsel you need to get a divorce from your husband. I mean, your wife. I'm sorry, let me say that. You need to get a divorce from your husband, because physical abusers very seldom change. Sometimes that happens, but if there's physical safety involved or other kinds of abuse, then
absolutely.
My career would say you just got to get out of that thing and get some separation. But many times in this day and age, it's the woman leading the man. And that was my case. There's a thing called walk away wife syndrome that, your listeners may want to poke into. But the men that we get coming to men's divorce recovery are the men who are in general pretty good guys. Most of them did not cheat on their wives. They didn't have, radical addictions that led to this divorce. I think there's something in the culture, that's in a sense a good thing, that says, women need to step into, who they are, and they're fully human beings and all that kind of stuff. But a negative side effect of that, I believe, is this empowering women to take those steps of divorce when it's not needed. And I'm afraid that sort of thinking has infected Christian counseling as well. As a pastor for many, many years, I would never start with divorce as your option. I would always try to get the couple together. And so,
we know that Scripture tells us that God hates divorce.
He hates divorce. And, in my particular case, then, my wife, now ex-wife, was a very hard person to live with. I shouldn't say too much, but I was not sad that she left me because she was just such a critical and negative person. But it still hurts so much. And over the years working with divorced men, then what I've come to believe is that, when God put together male and female in creation, that social fabric is as significant as what you might call this physical fabric of the universe. We're still to understand the space-time continuum, the gravity and all the way that the universe is pulled together, dark energy and dark matter. But there's something that holds all this thing together and makes it work. We know God made that. Well, when it comes to the social working of God's highest creation, which is humanity, this male-female union is the fabric. And even if a divorce is wanted, when that fabric is torn, there is pain and suffering. And that's why God hates divorce, because it's a rift in the social fabric, and that rip hurts. Even if you're completely okay with not living for the rest of your life with that person, which was my case. But the pain was very, very deep, and so I started ministry, to divorced men, men's divorce recovery. It kind of piddled along until I acquired a partner about a year ago, Chris Espinoza, and Chris reached out to me. His story is amazing. He was in Portland, and he was in the middle of divorce, and he was struggling. He found my book on Amazon and said it really got me through it. And so he called me and said, I want to help you. So now we have a partnership. We started a podcast about last April. I think we're on our 26th episode. And so far we've had over 15,000 downloads with people listening all over the world. We have 30 plus countries, which is remarkable to me. In fact, we have a good group out of Australia, and we Zoom with them, once a month with our Australian guys. But there's so much pain out there. And, Mike, I'm a hospice chaplain, so I work with dying men. I'm a Travis County Sheriff's Office chaplain. That's my full-time job. And we work with men that are law enforcement officers, corrections officers, and then men in prison. And I ran a reentry ministry for men coming out of prison for 2 years just before this job. And we're also working with divorced men. So the common denominator is, these men in crisis. And men are in a crisis because human beings hurt when things go poorly for them by their own choosing or by something that's been done to them. But I think there's really a deeper crisis among men that is increasing the pain. And as evidence of that, I'm in Austin, Texas, and within a 500-mile radius of me right in this space. There have been, I want to say, 7 major mass shootings in the last 5 years. So we have 2 at Fort Hood. Those were a little earlier. Santa Fe down in Houston. We had 5 police officers just get slaughtered in Dallas a few years ago. We have the El Paso shooting, the Walmart, the young guy that just decided he just hated Mexicans and went to that Walmart, shot up 20-something people. The Richland Springs massacre, young guy. What was the issue there? He was estranged from his wife, and his mother-in-law was in that church. That church is 60 miles from us, and he went in there and just killed, over 20 people before he himself was shot by a neighbor who was smart enough to bring his gun out and take him out. And then, of course, we have Uvalde, which is about 130 miles away from here. And the common denominator there is these young men who are just don't know what to do with their pain. So Richard, we always say in Minister Worship, Richard Rohr says that pain that is not transformed is transmitted, and that is just the law of the universe. Pain that is not transformed is going to come out somewhere, some way. You talk it out or take it out, and yet men just don't do that. And we're not encouraged to do that at all. So
so many of these young men. It's not in every case, but it's a large majority of them. You find out they've come from broken homes, or they've come from absent dad situations, and you're right. They've not had that solid male role model in their lives, and of course a lot of that comes from divorce in some ways, and so it's definitely needed in ministry. And I know with the type of ministry you're in, you see a lot more divorce cases than the average person in ministry probably. But let's kind of look at it. Is there a difference, or is there more from divorce cases from people that is not in church versus those who are in church? A difference, let's say, from the worldly standpoint versus the church standpoint? Is the divorce rate about the same, or is it different? Or
what the men we get are reaching out to specifically Christian ministry, and so we don't get guys. There's plenty of help out there if you're not a Christian. You're getting divorced. There's plenty of this self-destructive help. Just like I said before, the resources I mentioned. So the guys we get are in general Christians, and many of them are strong Christians. In fact, we have several that they were in ministry together with their wives, either pastoring churches or missionaries, on the mission field. I think the stats are that divorce among Christians is about the same. It may be a little lower than the general population, but I'd like to point out more research recently has shown that through some research by Barna, kind of correlated with other Pew research and everything, has shown that really when you're talking about the evangelical Christians in America, that the high numbers, maybe 40% or 35 or 40%, something like that. And it's been a while since I've looked at this, but those high numbers are radically exaggerated. That really about 6 to 8% of the American population are truly Bible believing, church going, solid Christians. So when we hear about Christians do this or Christians are bad, because it's very popular right now to slam in take every single opportunity to slam Christians, either overtly or most usually covertly, because it takes courage to do that, and sometimes cowards are perpetrating this. Then you're talking about you're not talking about, this is not a Christian nation. It is a very minority Christian nation. Only 6 to 8% of that population really are. And when you go into a church, the research shows that the church itself, church members, people that are sitting in that pew in the main non-denominational church, they are not Christians. They do not understand. As a hospice chaplain, I have been stunned. I would say that out of 100 patients, I've had over 2,000 patients. Out of 100 patients, about 2 to 3 will have what I call living faith, which is a true faith. And those guys are like, "Yep, I'm ready to go to heaven. Why hadn't God taken me?" And the rest of them, are you going to go? Yeah, I think so. Well, why? Well, I think I've been pretty good. And I grew up in Southern Baptist life, and we were taught from the minus 9 months, in my case, minus 9 months plus 61 years, that you are saved by grace. And yet even people growing up in that environment still do not understand grace and don't get it. They don't get it. So
that is so true. And that's one of the things when God moved me into this ministry to men is he pointed me to a scripture in Matthew from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 7:21-23. And Jesus was basically speaking to the church, so to speak. The church hadn't been fully established at that time, but he was basically warning us exactly what we are seeing in our churches today, that not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. And then, of course, he says, some of them will say, but didn't I do this? Didn't I do that? Didn't I do this in your name? And he says, but I never knew you. And there's so many in our churches that fall into that category, and they're going to be surprised when they enter eternity. And Jesus looks at them and says, "I never knew you."
Yeah,
It's a sad situation. And I told a group of men here just a few weeks ago. I said the men that scare me the most about their spiritual condition are the men who grew up in church and has not known any other life but a church life.
Yeah.
Because if you're not careful, you can become inoculated against the gospel, and because you've heard it all your life and you think you're okay. But it's very important. Getting back to your ministry, though, we got sidetracked just a little bit, but I think that was a God thing. But divorce cases in the churches, are you seeing more pastors these days having that issue? Or
well, that was
you're a pastor yourself, and you got kind of blindsided by the fact that what happened to you, but is that kind of rare, or is that becoming norm, so to speak?
I think it's becoming more. I'm sure there's statistics that my sense is that there are more, because we do have some people on church staffs and missionaries that were missionaries at one time, or very involved, like in Campus Crusade or something like that. And their stories are traumatic, because in a sense, if you're a pastor, you're in Christian ministry, then you start out with your spouse on this Christian journey. You're just not supposed to end this way at all. Another kind of shocking piece of that is the very poor response of churches to divorce pastor staff and to
churches don't want to deal with it, do they?
They don't, and they don't want to deal with divorced people. So the way I kind of say that is, way back in the day, then 40 years ago, then if you were divorced, you literally could not, in most churches, be in leadership. I mean, it didn't matter the circumstances, whether it's biblical divorce or not. You were just tainted with this big D.
Yeah.
And in what we know, divorce was was much more rare back in those days. Well, now today, it seems like the church has kind of switched gears in the sense that, well, divorce happens so often that it's not a big deal. But the way I would like to describe the pain you're in when you're divorced compared to these two eras is that, let's just say that out of 100 guys back 40 years ago, one guy had to have, just by its lottery, the way society worked, you had to have your big toe cut off. So if you're the one guy out of 100 that you were chosen, you had to have your big toe cut off. Well, if you're that guy, that's going to hurt, right? Now, let's say things have changed, and now society says, well, 50 out of 100 guys, you have to have your big toe cut off. Well, now, if you're one of those guys, guess what? It's going to hurt just today, just like it did 40 years ago, whether there's one of you or there's 50 of you. Right. And I think the church is there's a dualistic sort of thing here that it's no big deal because it happens so often. But then the church does shun, certainly past. And I tried probably 200 church positions and never got through the door into a church position again. And one of my friends here in Austin, he really said it best. He said, "You know what? You look great on paper on a resume, but if you're the guy that I want, and I'm hiring, if he's hiring for staff, then I know it's going to take me extra work to investigate what happened with you and to sell you to the church because you're divorced. So there's still this deep-seated prejudice in churches against divorce. And what this does, and what this always does to men, whatever their circumstances, is when they are pushed away and their pain is not acknowledged, then it makes them angrier and it drives them into more isolation. So, the big thing for divorced men is you have got to get connected. And we talk about, you've got to build a team. And the best way to illustrate this is just think about football. I grew up going to every UT football game, University of Texas home game in the world. I learned a couple things there. One was that no referee ever seemed to pay any attention to my dad yelling at them. It never happened. I went to many, many games, and he screamed, but I don't think they listened to even a single word he said. But the other thing was, and we know this to be true, is that when a guy goes down on the field, then an amazing medical team rushes out there and starts to work. And we saw that with DeMar Hamlin. And that was instant. And everybody stops what they're doing. Everybody, watches in their thing. And when the guy's down on the field, when the team runs up, he says, "I got this." He doesn't say, "I got this. I don't need you guys. I'm good. I'm a man. Get away from me." None of that happens. The guy goes down. Everybody knows he's hurt. They assess what's going on, and they rush the medical team out there. Now, what happens in divorce is, or any other painful event for men in this culture, is you are just not supposed to need help. And so that drives men into isolation. Or let's go back to the football illustration. There's another group of people out there on that football field, right? They're called the cheerleaders. Now, if you're a guy and you went down on the turf, you may rather look at the cheerleaders. You'd may rather have the cheerleaders come over and look at you and you look at them. But those cheerleaders are not only going to not help you, they're going to get in the way of the medical team. And for divorced men and men in pain, the cheerleaders are porn, strip club, prostitution, hookups, that kind of thing. So guys, if you're in pain, whatever your cause of your pain, you don't need the cheerleaders in your life. They will get in your way. You need that medical team. And so we tell guys, you've got to build this team of a good friend, one or two good friends. You don't need any more than that. Your pastor, a men's leader within the church. You need a counselor, a therapist, and then a lawyer, financial planner, and your medical doctor. And you have got to build the team. And it takes more work than normal. Oh, I should say, it just takes more work than it should have to. And the best way to illustrate that is say, we just got 988, 40 years after 911. So if I have a physical emergency, there is an amazing infrastructure put in place that will be instantly activated if I go down physically. I mean, fire, ambulance, hospital, ER. But when it comes to soul pain, that infrastructure is simply not there in this country. So men, you have to work harder at it to get this team around you, but you probably will not make it without this team. Divorced men are 8 times more likely to commit suicide than divorced women, and more likely, obviously, to commit suicide than divorce, than just the general population. And then there are all the self-destructive habits, which are the addictions. And porn is just made for divorced guys. They're angry at women. They've been told they're not a man, and they're alone and they are isolated. So for divorced men, everyone that I've talked to struggles with porn because it's just ready-made for them. I mean, they can have fun, they can get mad, they can get back at woman, they can prove their virility. This is really a big problem that we have to deal with, and divorced men are in their isolated, just set up for that addiction and alcohol and drug use and all this kind of stuff. So the stats on all this is for divorced men and widowed men too, in some ways, really they are in a very vulnerable spot. And let's say that the common I think cultural sort of soup of the day is to say, well, they deserve it. I mean, men deserve whatever they get. It's their turn to feel some pain. But you know what? Nobody wins. Nobody wins if a man loses. If a divorced man suicides, if a divorced man goes into self-destructive habits, every single person loses. But if a guy wins, if he comes to Christ and he builds his new life around some godly habits that will build his foundation, and he steps into that amazing plan that God has for his life, then he wins, his children win, his future wife wins, her children win. So this is a very large population. There are about 15,000 divorces every week in America, every week. Large population that's hurting but is very underserved. And then they also do some self-destructive things. So, and this is true of all the men I work with, men coming out of prison. You know, we may blame men, but you know what, for whatever, and sometimes they very much deserve it, but nobody wins if that man is if he loses. Every single person loses. So
yeah, you know, it hurts me greatly when we have a brother who is going through some marital difficulties that may be headed towards divorce, and we seem to blame the man
yep,
more than we do the woman.
Yes.
And we you know, the old saying is the church shoots its wounded. It don't come alongside of the wounded and try to help them. And you were talking about that team, and that's the reason why you need that team to help them walk through the pain, help them walk through the difficulties and the struggles and the issues that they're going to come. Because I'm sure there was times in your own life when you went through this, you had to deal with psychological warfare, so to speak, that you had no idea that was there, and you didn't know how.
Yeah, that pain. Those in 15 months, I lost my church, and then my mom died, and then I lost. My wife left me, and then I lost 2 families at that point. In the new church, I just started pastoring, so it was a bad run. But you know, my testimony is that in that God totally and absolutely met me. I mean, when you're totally stripped down and you have nothing but God, that is probably a good place to be, you know. Yeah, and God totally, he really met me. I mean, I experienced his comfort. I experienced him just holding me and saying, you know, it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. And, you know, I learned a couple of things. You cannot die of crying. You know, you won't die if you cry, and you can't cry forever. so well, it's okay to cry. It's not going to kill you, and you can't do it forever. And it's awesome.
Yeah. But, it is not unmanly for us to cry from time to time.
And, you know, Mike, probably the easiest way to express the okayness of men expressing their heartfelt anguish is to read the Bible, because as far as we know, the Bible is written by men. We have Miriam's song, we have Mary's song, Hebrews, maybe Priscilla wrote it, we don't know. But every expression, every tender expression, or every outcry of pain, David in Psalm 13, a man wrote that. And a manly man wrote that. James, Paul, you know, these are manly men. David, King David, he fought with a real sword, not in a video game. You know, I mean, and so these are manly men that nobody would look at these guys and say, you guys are wimps. And yet they would say, I cry out to the God, you know, where are you? You know, these very emotional expressions are written.
They fall on their face. They fall on their face.
On their face. Yep.
Yeah. Yep. And just worship God because of the interact. But yeah, I mean, we see that throughout the scriptures of how these men just yield themselves to the Father, you know, to minister to them.
That's okay. Okay.
It is. Dale, we're coming up on our time. Man, I wish we could continue this discussion because I know we hadn't even really broached the subject. How to minister to men who are headed towards divorce or has gone into divorce and is trying to recover their life now. You got so much that you can share. I know. And so Dale, what is the one thing, as we start to wrap this up, that you want to share with the guys, if you can think about it a minute or two or something like that, just that one thing you would like to encourage guys who may be going through the difficulty of moving into a divorce situation or is trying to come out of a divorce situation?
Well, a couple of things. I think that staying married is usually easier than getting divorced. And when people are getting divorced, they flip those. They think staying married is impossible and getting divorced is easy. And that's absolutely not true. And you will lose. There's no way to take a single pie and divide it into half and everybody get more pie. It's going to hurt. What we always tell our men is we say the 2 things: don't make it worse. You can think a lot of things, but you cannot put in prison for thinking those things. If you act on some of those things, they can put you in prison, and they will. So, and that happens quite a bit. So I've seen very rational, intelligent, brilliant men act out in this amazing anger that they have in painful ways. We also say, determine now that you're going to finish well. So whatever agony you're in, you decide now that when
well, Dale, I appreciate your time. If somebody wanted to get up with you, how would they do that? By your email, maybe, or
if you want to email me, definitely that is an email address that works. mensdivorcerecovery.org is our website, and then you'll find what we have to offer there. That's really the main place to go. And we encourage you to listen to the podcast. We've had guys that have literally said, I've listened over and over again to the same episodes because they're in so much travail, and all the way up to Canada, to Australia, to Croatia.
What is your podcast called? Called?
It's called Men's Divorce Recovery. Yep.
Okay.
Apple or whatever you want to do. Men's Divorce Recovery. It shows up there. So.
And you can find it on just about any of the podcast websites, right?
Every single one, I think. So.
Yep. Good. Well, Dale, I do appreciate you being here. And men, if you want to know more about what Cape Fear Men is all about, you can reach out to us by going to capefearmen.net. And you can email me directly if you want to ask me any questions or talk to me about anything at mike.sandlin@capefearmen.net. And we will definitely respond to you at the appropriate time. Well, thank you for listening to Intentional Conversations with Mike Sandlin. Intentional Conversations is a production of Cape Fear Men and Men's Ministry Coalition. And I encourage you to please leave us a comment about the program. It helps us as we develop more programming to help you as men to fight the battle for men's souls. But for now, I will leave you with this blessing. I pray God will give you a rock to stand on, a brook to drink from, and a tree to shade you. This is Mike Sandlin saying God bless, and I hope you will join me again on the next Intentional Conversations with Mike Sandlin.